Welcome back, everyone, to the House of Hustle podcast on Sports Radio 810. We are presented by Charlie Hustle. I am your host, Jarrett Sutton. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Stephen St. John. Stephen, we got some coverage here of the NBA draft to catch up on today. We'll dive into what's ahead after the NBA draft. So much goes on after the draft with free agency and summer league. We got a lot to cover here this week on the podcast. How we doing?
We're doing pretty well, but as you mentioned, Charlie Hustle is our wonderful sponsor. You can go to charliehustle.com to see all of their wares, and I'm at charliehustle.com right now. We got to stop by Charlie Hustle. I need to get my hands on this shirt, George Brett for President 1980. Look at this beautiful shirt.
Look at that face.
George Brett's wearing it, and that's the George. They used to have the bumper stickers. George Brett was so popular back when he was on his chase
80s George
for 400.
Yep.
And that's the George on the T-shirt that my mother fell in love with. So I would like to wear the George Brett for President T-shirt that George wears. If he wears it, I'll wear it. Charlie Hustle has it, and so let's get our hands on that.
It's time. It's been long overdue. We got to get back to the Charlie Hustle location.
That's exactly right.
And say hello.
That's exactly right.
See what their new gear is.
Absolutely. And so we got lots of stuff to talk about, but it was an exciting night for several local products in the NBA draft. And so let's get into that. And, of course, you being a scout for the New Orleans Pelicans, you put a lot of work in. And so now I'm sure that you're glad that the draft is gone, and so you can move on and move forward. We'll talk a little bit later on about what's next for you. But let's talk about some of the local products that were drafted. Grady Dick goes number 13 to the Toronto Raptors, and he wears a ruby red suit.
How about that?
Which a lot of people then insinuated that he's a guest star on the HBO show The Righteous Gemstones, which, hey, he could fit in. But you know what? It made a statement, I think. And so if you're going to dress up, wear something that people are going to remember from draft night, and he certainly did that. But what about the fit of him going to Toronto and going number 13 overall?
Yeah, I was actually, surprised at just Grady being there at 13. I thought he was going to go probably a little bit higher. There were some teams ahead that were identifying shooting, like the Orlando Magic, who went with Jet Howard, that was a big surprise right away with Jet getting selected at 11, and then Grady goes a couple picks after that. But good fit all in all, and just Toronto, wanting to identify shooting and size, and Grady provides that. Grady was, in my opinion, the best shooter in the draft. I think it's between him and Jordan Hawkins, who we took right after Grady. And those two guys were elite all year shooting the ball. Grady finished 40% from three as a freshman, true freshman at Kansas in the Big 12. I think he shot 44% from the field as well. So had a great freshman year, very athletic. Was a terrific high school player too. Great scorer. I think he can do a couple other things well in terms of what he might be able to project in a 2 to 3 year window, and he's young. So that's the biggest thing with some of these guys is you get them young, they have an identifiable skill that gets him on an NBA floor, and he's got size, and I think he's a sneaky athlete just from a verticality standpoint. I think he can really elevate off the floor.
I like his confidence.
Absolutely. I mean, you wear the ruby red and you pay homage to Dorothy in Kansas. You got some confidence to you and some swag to you. So, he's a tough kid too. I was talking about Christian Brown a couple weeks ago, and just Christian Brown has a toughness that is more outward. He's got an edge. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He kind of plays angry. With Grady, I think that's inside him. I think he has that same mentality. It's just not necessarily being worn on his sleeves, if you will. It's more internal, but he plays that same way. Different caliber athlete with Christian Brown and Grady Dick, but Grady Dick has more size and just the shooting component and what his upside is pretty real. So, in fact, he's in the lottery. What a great thing for Kansas too, to identify a one and done and get him selected in the lottery. And again, like I said, I thought he actually was going to be pretty higher than where he fell to 13. But Toronto gets a shooter and a guy that they can really implement right away and play right away as a rookie, which is what you want if you're Grady.
I know you hate when I do this, but is there a reasonably good comp for him on what type of pro he could be at the NBA level?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on what you would identify from a comp perspective of what he is now to what he could be. And there's some chatter, could he develop into more of like a Gordon Hayward type where he could add more to his game? But I think Kyle Korver is a good name of just a guy that can make shots, spread the floor. Really good shot IQ.
That's a hell of a shooter right there.
It's a great shooter, an elite shooter. Bogdanovich, I think has a little bit more to his game. He gets some Bogdanovich comps to him a little bit, and just what he could be in terms of adding more to his game, not just being solely a shooter, which I do think there is more to his game. I don't expect Grady to just be a catch-and-shoot spot-up guy. I expect him to be able to be put in different actions and over time put the ball on the floor. He showed a mid-range game. He's got to get better downhill to the rim, finishing, being more on balance. A lot of that will come with strength and development and just maturing and filling into his body. But mentality-wise, confidence, I think he does have a high IQ. I think most importantly, and I think Coach Self would tell you this too, he got so much better defensively, and I think there is still so much more for him to improve upon defensively. But where he was in October, from a defensive standpoint, and what the teaching was going into the year to where he ended up being by the end of the year, he was a reliable defender where his motor and his effort level was so high and his activity was high. He had some good rebounding games. I think he averaged close to 5.5 rebounds per game. But he had some good rebounding games towards the end of the year where you really saw him have more of an understanding of the speed, the physicality, understanding where the ball might be and being in the right place at the right time. And a lot of that is just IQ and feel and growth, and that's something you saw from Grady as the year went on that I think bodes well for him translating, because he's going to have to not just be a shot maker. He does have an elite skill that gets him on the floor, but then how does his career develop, and you got to add more to your game to really stick.
So Grady Dick goes number 13 overall to the Toronto Raptors. Let's move ahead in the first round. Number 30 overall to the Clippers, out of Mizzou, Kobe Brown. And so this was, look, when he was debating whether or not to come back, I think there were some Mizzou fans who were hoping that he would come back for one more year, because it felt like the decision was, okay, do I come back, still make some good money at Mizzou through NIL, or do I go into the NBA draft and hopefully get drafted in the second half of the second round? Because that's a legitimate decision there.
Absolutely.
Like, if we'd have known he was a first-round pick, there was no decision there.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up, number 30, a first-round pick, 2 years guaranteed, where he's going to make a little bit over $4 million, and that's huge. And then he got club options for 3 and 4. And so it was a great decision. But were you surprised at all that he found his way into the first round?
A little surprised, but, I know Kobe said this, and his agents, were very vocal about him, having a possibility of getting into the late first. I think it all depends on, it only takes one team. That's the reminder in this situation is if one team likes you, they're going to take you high. And throughout the draft, too, in this specific draft, and there's always some surprises, but it felt like there were quite a few of players that you thought, man, that's pretty high, or players that fell that you thought, man, that's not at all where I expected him to be. And there was quite a few guys that fell into this. So it was a very, I wouldn't say unique draft, but it was just different than the 3 years prior. In terms of my years with the Pelicans, it was definitely a draft that had just a lot of, shakeup and a lot of guys that fell and guys that were elevated. But Kobe was probably in that late first, early second, mid second. His range was pretty broad. I think it depends on what teams you would ask. But for him, great fit in LA with the Clippers. He improved his game so much from a three-point shooting percentage. Obviously, one of the best players in the SEC, first-team All-SEC player. Old school, stayed in college all 4 years at Mizzou, improved, went through a coaching change. I think he fits an NBA type of role because from a mentality standpoint, he probably isn't most comfortable being the guy. He had to be the guy. He had to be aggressive this year for Mizzou because he was their best player, and I think he did that and accomplished that. But he goes back in the NBA, it's going to be a little bit different in terms of the role he will play. He's got to be able to shoot the ball, and he proved that. I mean, what was it, 46% from three on something like 3 attempts per game? That's good volume for a guy that had a versatile skill set too, Steven, like a guy that could put the ball on the floor. obviously his strength and frame is what is very intriguing about him at the NBA, because the game is so physical now, and you need versatility of guys that might be able to play the 4 or maybe some small ball 5 or maybe the 3. And Kobe's probably best suited as a 4, but if he continues to shoot the ball well, he could maybe open up, more of a versatility where he could play in some smaller lineups or be able to be trusted, in a different position. But great rebounder, team defender, physical guy. I'm going to embrace whatever role is given to him. And it's a great opportunity for him in LA to get his career started. And like you said, when you're in a first-round conversation, you have way more of an opportunity to have a longer leash of you're going to get multiple chances to really prove yourself. And clearly they see him as a guy that can come right in and help off their bench, be in their second unit, and be able to maybe produce right away for LA.
Okay, so try to explain this to me, and I guess give me the perspective of an NBA scout, right? You talked about his improved shooting. He's a 4-year guy. From three-point land, he shot 25% his freshman year, 25% year 2, 20% year 3, and then 45.5% year 4.
Yep.
20% to 45%. And the volume went up.
Mm-hmm.
He averaged 2.5 three-point attempts a game his first 2 years, 2.1 his third year, then 3.3 his last year. When you're looking at this, is there at least a fear that, man, that's such a big jump, that could be flukish? Is that real? Because you don't see that kind of a jump.
Yeah.
Especially when usually then the volume goes way down.
Right.
You don't see that kind of jump with the volume increasing. And so if it's not a fluke, how in the hell how did they do that? How does that happen to a guy? Because you don't see that, especially from a guy that's been there 4 years.
Yeah. So it's eyes, ears, and numbers is kind of how I would say it. So with your eyes, it's what you're seeing. When you go to games, you watch practices, you study film. It's what you're seeing, the visual part of his improvement in those areas. Then it's what you're hearing. What are coaches saying in terms of what the work he's putting in, how they believe in his shooting, maybe the different actions they're putting him in, where he's most comfortable. Areas that maybe were untapped. Especially with a coaching change, things that they maybe identified that maybe the previous regime didn't identify in his development. So that part of it, and then it's the numbers piece, the analytics part of it. That tells a big story, but you can't just go off the numbers. You got to really understand, the player and how that orchestrates translating from college to the NBA, because there's so many guys that have a specific role in college as the best player. It's almost like going from high school to college, right? You're the best player on your high school team. Then you go to college and it's, wait a second, I'm not the best guy. I don't have the ball in my hands. How do I survive, right? And that to me is kind of where you see Kobe's evolution and where maybe he might be able to make even a bigger jump to the NBA game of just going back to where I think his role is most comfortable. But in terms of just his development as a shooter, he shot 60% from the field too. So it's not just the fact he was making threes. It's just the fact that he was so efficient around the rim and making tough buckets and finishing through physicality, getting to the free throw line and sticking free throws. Like, he just took a big jump, and I feel like it all came together. And you give Kobe a lot of the credit because it comes from the work ethic. It comes to staying locked into, he didn't run, to a different program. He wasn't trying to get patted on the back and told how great he was. He knew he had to improve in specific areas. He had the physicality, he had the body, he had the frame, he had the athleticism. He just had to put it all together, and he did that. And then you got to give Dennis Gates and his staff a lot of credit, too, of identifying what he needed. And that, to me, was a lot of just belief in him, a lot of that confidence needing to take a step forward. And if you going to a Mizzou practice in the fall and hearing Coach Gates talk to Kobe and stopping practice, and the only time he would stop for Kobe Brown specifically was shoot the ball, be aggressive, or I don't hear you. You need to be talking more, because if Kobe talked more, his energy level and just the fire would be there more often. And then you saw that in game. So it's so much about just development in all different facets, because player development is kind of a broad term. Every player development program for each player has to look different. It has to be geared and strategic to what that player needs. And I think from the player's side, it's a give and take. The player has to be engaged. it's a 50-50, almost 100-100 type of situation where the coaches and the player have to be on the same page. And you have the year that Kobe Brown had, and how I think every Mizzou fan viewed Kobe Brown of this could be him for us. And he took that big step forward, and it helped Mizzou get to the NCAA tournament. And I think big reason they won an NCAA tournament game, that Utah State game, Kobe Brown was excellent and really put Mizzou on his back to carry them to a win, which he had to do.
All right, let's move on to the second round. Back-to-back picks of interest. The Thunder, with the 50th overall pick, draft Keyontae Johnson out of K-State. And then the next pick, number 51, the Nets take Jalen Wilson out of Kansas. Let's start with Keyontae Johnson. Look, that's a great story. And for him even to come back and play at the level he did at Kansas State, that was awesome.
That was awesome.
But now he works his way into being a draft pick and having a chance to have a career in the NBA. And I know that you love the player and the person, and so I know you were happy to see him get drafted, right?
I was, and with both those guys, a little bit surprising that they fell where they fell. With Keyontae, it was probably different of why he was where he was. A lot of that pertains to just the medical. But in terms of his production and his efficiency, and I mean, we just talked about Kobe's frame. I mean, Keyontae is just chiseled, strong, great athlete, a great IQ. Keyontae is very smart, understands the game at a very high level. It is not an easy thing to sit out almost 2 years, pass up, an insurance policy at the University of Florida to really keep your career hopes alive when there was still so much unknown. And another credit to the coaching staff at Kansas State with Jerome Tang, wanting to identify a veteran, an older player, experienced player, a leader, and they found that in Keyontae Johnson, and they were able to bring him to Manhattan. And the rest speaks for itself. The K-State year that they had, and Marquise Noel is a big part of this. We'll talk about him in a minute, but Keyontae was the guy for them all year. I mean, they didn't go anywhere unless Keyontae Johnson played at a high level, and he did all year. He was consistent across the board, shot the ball so well from three. Another guy that was great through contact. I think he got better as a defender. That was a big area of, I think, just growth and something he needed to prove this year was being able to defend, being trusted on the defensive end, but offensively, his ability to move without the ball, his ability to play on the block, his ability to take the ball off the bounce, drive closeouts, spot up threes. You saw his mid-range game, being able to play off the bounce and mismatch situations, and he showed his versatility. Oklahoma City gets a great pick here because it's a value pick at 50. It's probably someone most teams had higher and fell kind of similar to Cam Whitmore falling because of medical, who was a top 5 talent that fell to 20, I believe. Kind of similar to Keyontae. I'm sure teams had a higher grade on him. We specifically did as well, myself included. And for Keyontae to fall probably more based on medical. But again, a great story. And that the story to me is still being written because, I think he's going to a place that is a young team, a emerging team in the West. Team's got a ton of talent around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. It's had 3 great drafts where they've selected somewhat like 10 players, 11 players over the last 3 years that make up quite a bit of their roster. So they're very young, and he fits in. And, he's going to have to find his role in terms of coming off the bench, and he'll have to have a strong summer league and a strong training camp. But, a guy that will be probably on a 2-way contract and be back and forth, and will have every opportunity to make the case of him being in their second unit or just being on the end of that bench, having an opportunity to possibly play a little bit. And start his NBA career on a good note. But it's all about opportunity, and he goes to a team that's young that might be able to give him that opportunity.
And then you got Jalen Wilson, who, again, going number 51 to the Nets. I think that surprised the people that he fell that far. But again, and I think a good comparison, just the profile to Kobe Brown.
Yeah.
Maybe a guy that doesn't have this high ceiling like some of the 18 and 19-year-old kids that NBA scouts and NBA teams can dream on, but a guy that is equipped to come in and help and be an asset off the bench, that had a lot of experience in college basketball, that could bring in maturity and the ability to help a team in a number of different ways. Yeah,
Big 12 Player of the Year, national champion, another guy that stayed in school and went back to Kansas after having a great combine the year prior and a great pre-draft process. And interviewed so well, and there was a strong case that he would stay in the draft the year prior and be a second-round pick and take a two-way and be in a good spot. And I think what that uncovered last spring and really the last combine period was that if he goes back to Kansas, and NIL makes this a different conversation, now guys going back, there's a reason they go back. It's a smart decision from just the financial part of it, and then the role and being, going back to Kansas and being the number one option, and something that Jalen didn't have his years prior at Kansas. He was more of a role guy. Huge part of why they won a national championship as a defender, as a rebounder, multi-positional defender, and a guy that can make a spot shot and drive a closeout and play athletically. Different role this year, and he showed more off the bounce. The shooting piece kind of fell off towards the end of the year. I think he finished 33%, and I remember at one point in the year he was up at 38, 39%, and that was probably first of the year in January, mid-January, late February. He fell off towards the end of the year. A lot of that is just the wear and tear. He was the number one option. He's playing 33 minutes, 34 minutes a night. He's got to be an aggressive physical defender. He's got to be a great rebounder. He's got to do so much for that Kansas team, where I think that's a lot on someone's shoulders. And Ochai was more of a scorer. He was a shooter, and although he was a great defender himself, he could focus more on the offensive end. And then you had Jalen Wilson and Christian Brown defending, a lot of teams' best players. So it helped Ochai a little bit just to keep his legs towards January, February, especially March, when they needed Ochai in the NCAA tournament on that national championship run. So Jalen just a lot on his shoulders for the season he had, and he had a great year. 20-point-per-game scorer, 8 rebounds per game. Still had a solid year. The numbers and the efficiency probably aren't as high as he would want. Didn't have a great combine. I think that was a part of the reason that he fell, which I would probably push back on just because he had such a great combine process the year prior. And look, it's no joke to be Big 12 Player of the Year. The Big 12 is a great league. It's a physical league. Great teams in that league. And Jalen Wilson's at the top of the scouting report, and he's taken shot after shot, night in, night out, and had a terrific year and a productive year. So I think Brooklyn gets a great pick there at 51. I thought Jalen would go much higher. I think most scouts would say that too. But with the second round being what it was and the way it panned out, it was very clear that the names that were going ahead of Jalen Wilson were younger guys that were developmental plays, that were long-term projections of guys that, highly talented coming out of high school, maybe shooters, positional size, guys that you could maybe mold, put on a two-way and develop. And Jalen's more of that older guy that's going to have to make it on a two-way, play well in the G League, and hopefully get an opportunity where he could fulfill a role coming off the bench, which I think is going to be his role. He'll have to shoot it well. It's going to come down to his shooting, but he can rebound the basketball. He's a smart, tough, physical kid, knows who he is, knows what is going to be asked of him, and I think that always bodes well for a guy that's older, and a benefit to getting an older guy is they're not coming in with any false aspirations of who they are going to be in the NBA. They're not looking at themselves as a starter or someone that's going to be in a multi-year all-star. They're looking at it as, I'm going to come off the bench, I got to make shots on a second unit, maybe I'll play 15 minutes or 18 minutes, or maybe it's 5 minutes, and I got to give my best self in those minutes. And Jalen Wilson, I think, will do that because he's proven it before. That's what he did his first few years at Kansas and what he did when he was part of that national championship team as well at Kansas.
But, it's interesting because sometimes you'll see the NBA can be a copycat league.
Yep.
All leagues are.
Yep.
And, what did we hear about for like a month straight about the Miami Heat, and the way they've built their roster? They've got second-round picks and undrafted guys, but they fit the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they always say in Miami. They fit their roles. They understood the roster building and the team concept. They had their superstar in Jimmy Butler. They have Bam. And then they, Tyler Hero. And then they built around that. It just seems to me like some NBA teams get so caught up in the ceiling and what a player could be that sometimes they'll step over what a player is, like a Kobe Brown, like a Jalen Wilson. Because I think we'll both agree there were some players that were taken ahead of Jalen Wilson. And you're like,
yeah, no question.
Why? What? And then maybe like in a couple of years, those teams will look back, or those fans of those teams will look back like, why was he available in the second round? How many guys do you say that about right now in the NBA? Like, how in the hell did he end up a second-round pick?
Yeah.
Because teams fall in love with the what-ifs and instead of the what is.
Yep. And I say this. I think I say this every year when we talk about the draft. When it starts to draft time, and you get the question of, is this a good draft? And every year, every single year, whether it's at the top of the draft, there's going to be guys that make it. There's going to be guys that fail, and there's going to be guys that fail in the life. If you go back and look at past drafts over the last 5 years, there's going to be some guys that are in the top 14 that fail. There's going to be some guys that end up being multi-year starters. Some of them could be all-stars, that you just never know how. But then there's always drafts where you see someone in the 40s or you see someone in the 30s that are significant contributors or role players and sometimes starters that we've seen in the NBA playoffs. That Jimmy Butler was the 30th pick with the Bulls, back in the day, and Kobe Brown's 30th, to the Clippers. So just the number associated with the player in the draft. I always say, like, after the draft, it doesn't really matter where you're picked. The money part of it makes that, what it is, right? If you're in the top 14, you're allotted to this specific number. If you're late first, if you're second, is it guaranteed? Are you on the two-way contract or the E10? Are you undrafted? Going to Summer League on a Summer League camp invite? That's different. But at the end of the day, like, you see guys make it through, and the Miami Heat are a perfect example of this, of guys that go to Summer League, they're not on any sort of deal, and now they're on a three-way deal playing in the NBA Finals. Your career starts now at the NBA level, whether you're 19 years old and you're a developmental prospect, or you're 22, 23 years old and you're a four-year guy and you're labeled as not having a lot of upside. Well, Jimmy Butler wasn't labeled with a ton of upside when he left Marquette. You look at his numbers at Marquette, he played 3 years there and developed totally into the player he is today, over the course of many years and different coaches and different systems and playing with different organizations. Now he's a player he is now. So it all depends on where guys go from here, and that's across the board with this. And this was a good draft. There's no question. Going into it, we knew this was going to be a good draft, not just at the top. There was a lot of value in that first round, and I think the way the draft played out, there are a lot of guys in this second round, mid to late, that you're thinking, man, some teams got some steals late. And some of these guys I was hoping were going to fall out of the draft. Trace Jackson-Davis, for one,
almost,
who was an elite player in the Big Ten, one of the best college bigs out there, athletic 5, a little bit undersized, but had a terrific year in the Big Ten, another great league. And he falls all the way to the bottom of the second round in the 50s and actually put a tweet out that says, "I'll remember this." And that was around 47, 48, where I'm thinking, if he goes undrafted, every team's going to be after him from a two-way standpoint. So it just depends on, where we go from here and how players pan out after they leave the draft and how they develop.
Okay, so we've referenced this. We're going to talk about this coming up because two of the local players signed two-way deals with teams after the draft. You had Demoy Hodge out of Mizzou signing with the Lakers, and then Marquise Noel out of K-State signing with the Toronto Raptors. So if you would, because we throw that around a lot, and I'm not sure everyone has a full grasp of exactly what it is. So please give a detailed explanation of what a two-way contract is and what that means for the player and what kind of door that opens up for them to potentially stick on an NBA roster.
Yeah, so the great thing about a two-way, you're allotted 3. Each team now with the new CBA rules, you get 3 two-way contracts. And how it works is if you're on a two-way contract, it's a flat rate. It's half the league's minimum salary. So and with that, you are considered rostered.
What's that? What's the league minimum?
League
salary?
minimum is probably around $450, close to $500. Right. Yeah. So
all right. You're living right.
Yeah. And the league minimum you can operate. Every team's different in how they would view the minimum, but it's usually right there between $450 to $500. So you're half that. You're rostered. You're salaried. You're on the two-way contract, and that allows you to go back and forth. So you can go to the G League. You can be called up to the NBA roster. It's great from just in terms of you want to be having that flexibility, because if you're on a team that struggles with some injuries and all of a sudden you're being called up to fulfill a role and that's your opportunity, you're going to be thrown in an NBA game. You might play 20 minutes. You might sit at the end of the bench for 3-4 games and then get called up. So it allows you to be rostered and move back and forth, as opposed to if you weren't on the two-way contract and you're on an E10, you have to be called up to a 10-day contract. So it just gives you the opportunity. It's a better chance for you to get to the NBA, to be on a roster, and to hopefully, getting on the floor to help prove yourself. And I think the fact that definitely with Demoy Hodge and Marquise Noel, both were put on a two-way quickly. And some teams would say, man, we thought they might be on an E10. And so the fact teams liked him that much to use one of their two-way contracts on Demoy and on Marquise, I think speaks to how they were valued and how teams view them. Demoy Hodge was excellent at Portsmouth, had some good games out there, interviewed really well. And then Marquise Noel at the NBA Combine, at the G League Elite Camp, I should say. I thought he was a worthy of a call up, and I think some teams maybe didn't vote for him to make sure he didn't get a call up because they liked him so much and wanted to keep him maybe in the realm for them getting a two-way. So he was very good at the Combine, great passer, and just as we saw at Kansas State, just plays with such a great energy, plays so hard. Relentlessly tough, can take all sorts of contact and play through contact, and his vision, passing, that's what he's going to be at the NBA. He's small, he's undersized, there's a lot to prove because he is one of the smaller guards, and of those smaller guards, like Tiger Campbell at UCLA, smaller guard, a little bit bigger than Marquise. Tyree Appleby at Wake Forest is another guy that was in this conversation. So they're all Kendrick Davis at Memphis, like these smaller point guards. There's always these smaller point guards that get kind of looped together. Some of them get put on two ways. Some of them get put on E10s. For us, it was Jose Alvarado a few years ago, and now, he's a rostered player on an NBA salary on a multi-year contract, and we got him on an E10, out of the draft as undrafted. So you never know. It goes back to my point earlier of you just need an opportunity, and for Marquise and Demoy, they're getting an opportunity on that two-way contract that I think really speaks to what they might be able to bring an NBA franchise over time. And the Jose Alvarado example, like we went through an array of injuries. He gets on the floor and earns those minutes as a rookie, plays really well, plays with an edge, plays with that level, plays with a total fearlessness. And most four-year guys, like Marquise Noel, kind of is made like that. And he goes to Toronto. They've had great success with Fred VanVleet. Fred had these same characteristics of Marquise, and Demoy's a little different, and Demoy's skill set is obviously 3-and-D. Like he's a great three-point shooter in catch and shoot. He's got elite hands defensively, led the SEC in steals, broke the school record in steals, and jumped from the Horizon League to the SEC, increased all his numbers across the board. So in the same breath, we're talking about Kobe Brown and how much Dennis Gates deserves and his staff deserve credit. Same can be said for what they did, with Demoy Hodge. And I say, the same thing with Jerome Tang and Marquise Noel, right? Marquise played totally different under Jerome Tang, and just the system, the style, and what they let Marquise do this year, and really what they tried to push him to do more of as a scorer, as a passer, be more aggressive with trying to find your offense. Marquise did that, and here they both are as two-way contracts.
So, we've talked about Kobe Brown and Demoy Hodge, and both of them, even though it wasn't as dramatic, if you look at the three-point shooting percentage for Demoy Hodge, it went up from like 30 and 33% to 40%. We talked about the dramatic increase for Kobe Brown. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think anyone looked at those two guys before last year and said, okay, those are two NBA players. Maybe on Kobe, maybe he'd get a chance, but certainly not a first-round pick. Dennis Gates and C.Y. Young and their staff come in, take those two guys, and in 1 year with them at Mizzou, because you have to combine not only the coaching staff but now the facilities and everything else that Mizzou has to offer, and turn those two guys into NBA players, a first-round pick and a guy that gets a two-way deal. How, and I understand NIL is going to be the biggest factor for some kids, and how much money can you give me and everything else, but how powerful and how important of a tool is that for Dennis Gates and C.Y. Young on the recruiting trail, telling some kids, look, these two players were good basketball players, but 1 year with us, look at their development, we turn them into two NBA players. Just think what we can do with you in 2 or 3 or 4 years on campus. Mm-hmm. Is that, I mean, that's got to be used, right? That's got to be super impressive, only 1 year, and what they did as far as their shooting percentage, their all-around games, and turning them into NBA players.
Yeah, no question. I think fans can get caught up in, the portal and NIL and, oh my gosh, we're missing out on certain guys. Well, I mean, if you look back and you rewind the tape of Dennis Gates' first year, going into the year, and it was Kobe Brown's back. Who are these other guys? A lot of these guys are mid-majors. Are we going to be competitive? They were picked, last or second to last in the SEC. They finished top 4. Winning matters. I think that's very important. You talk to any coach from an NIL standpoint, if you're winning and you're successful, the NIL dollars look much different. The same can be said for your development and your growth in your career and trying to be drafted and, have a career in the NBA or playing professionally, whether it be in the NBA or overseas. There's going to be guys that aren't drafted that maybe play in summer league that go overseas and make great money. But those guys, if you come from winning programs and you come from a program where you see the growth and the evolution of a player and that development piece in 1 year, very difficult to do in 1 year, and just the style of play that Dennis Gates plays and Jerome Tang, for that matter, of the offensive flexibility, allowing guys to be themselves, allowing guys to. There's that trust there, and sometimes it can be frustrating for fans, but a lot of times it bodes well when a guy can showcase their talent and be confident and believe in themselves and play through mistakes and play through slumps and not get pulled. And that to me speaks to the confidence level of Kobe was so different than what we saw from him in his first 3 years. He played with more fire, more energy. He played like an alpha, which we've always wanted from Kobe Brown. And he did that. And I think that's going to bode well for him at the next level because he's now felt that. He knows what it feels like to play with that level of urgency, and he did that for most of the year, and that's why he was where he was. And for Demoy, my gosh, making that jump to the SEC and to have that level of production that he had, you can't beat a shooter, and you can't be a guy that also just defends and has the activity and the quick hands that he has. He's like I don't want to equate him to like a defensive back, but just the way he uses his hands and to get his hands on balls, whether it be deflections or poking balls away, he just has a natural instinct to him that bodes so well. And he's got that feel. And in terms of how he could translate as a shooter, playing off the ball and playing off of Nick Honor and playing off of Sean East and playing off of Kobe and playing out of pick and roll, all those things were just on full display. And this is something that I think Dennis Gates identified with Demoy long before he signed him to Mizzou, knowing the type of player Demoy was and what he was made of and his story and his ability to overcome adversity and just the love of the game and the passion for it and a worker and a guy that was, never made an excuse and a guy that was highly coachable. Kobe was the same way for multiple coaches too, staying in school and not transferring and believing in a new staff and being open to playing different ways and playing on the perimeter when he was a back to the basket big. And that's a lot on a player to adjust and play totally differently than what you played the year prior. And to see the growth, that bodes well for Coach Gates and Jerome Tang, same way. Keyontae was a great player, but getting Keyontae to where he was, Marquise Noel, Naquan Tomlin, who's coming back to school, who made a big jump this year, who's going to be a top option at Kansas State next year. I think Kansas State and Mizzou, these two local schools, for having first-year head coaches have the years they had, and then to see where these guys ended up is pretty impressive.
So the draft is over, but the work does not stop for an NBA scout. Now what's on the to-do list? You're going to be traveling quite a bit, aren't you?
Yeah, so I go to Orlando tomorrow, and I'll be at the NBA Top 100 camp, and it's a great camp. It's it's a 25 class, so Cooper Flagg and Cameron Boozer and those guys. That's a great class, by the way, and they're going to be seniors next year. So it's more so looking ahead. It's your first opportunity. And some of these guys I saw a year prior, whether it be at the Geico Nationals or Cameron Boozer was so good. He was playing in this last year. He was playing up because he's such a talent. So
and this would be the top 100
players.
Seniors
seniors to be, and then there's now the international component too. Well, they will bring some international players in, and it's great for college coaches too because they're coming. It's open to college coaches for recruiting. They've obviously been recruiting these guys for now several months, several years. So it's more so for them to kind of be seen, to see the logo. They're at games watching their guys, and it's a great opportunity for scouts to sit with those coaches. You're continuing to build those relationships and talk through, what coaches are looking at and what they're trying to build going into next year. And it's more of a relaxed setting for coaches to really kind of have those conversations with you. And then I'll go from there to Peach Jam. which is the EYBL Nike circuit. It's a great competitive AAU tournament. So you're seeing a lot of guys at that, maybe different guys that weren't at the top 100 camp. Some guys you'll see again that were in the top 100 camp that are really, from a summer standpoint, a lot of these top talents, they're everywhere. They're all over these events, and they're playing in the AAU circuit, and they're playing with USA Basketball. And so there's just a lot going on. And then I'll go to Summer League with our team. I'll be out in Vegas for 4 or 5 days with our team, seeing our guys, seeing our draft pick, Jordan Hawkins, play, and our two-way guys and E10 guys that we've signed. So we'll be busy, but it's a good busy all the way through really mid-July, and then we'll shut it down after that. So just kind of getting a head start on, classes to come, and then seeing how our guys that we've selected, how they fare in Summer League.
What's Summer League like? I mean, that seems like that's not just the games, but just who shows up to the games, and there's quite an atmosphere.
It's great, and if you're a basketball fan, and I mean, obviously Vegas is Vegas. It's a great event.
Vegas is Vegas. I can promise you that.
You see a lot of times too, like dads that bring their kids to see. It's a great environment to go to a game, and there's the Cox Pavilion and Thomas and Mack. You'll see players walk in the concourse. You'll have great, seats. You go to the Cox Pavilion. You're in somewhat of a high school gym watching NBA teams. A lot of NBA players will come support their teams, and it is a great event. If you're a basketball fan, I highly recommend, and you have kids that are basketball fans, it's a great summer trip to go see some players. It's great for my standpoint of you're around all other scouts, all other team executives. All teams are at NBA Summer League.
Is it usually like sold out? I mean, is it hard to get tickets? Like, is it like if someone's going to go out there, like you mentioned that? Like, is it
at the beginning? It's not sold out. I mean, there are good crowds, and
access is pretty
reasonable, and you get great access in terms of you're seeing there's games going on all day, all night, and you can bounce gym to gym, and the ticket gets you access to literally 2 different venues.
That's a good idea.
All within the Thomas and Mack Center, and you're walking around the concourse, and you might see Jerry West walking around, you might see Danny Ainge walking around, you might see Bird walking around. I mean, it's great in terms of the access. And, obviously you'll conduct interviews out there. And for me, too, I'll have specific teams I'll be covering because we do have a couple two-way spots open. So I'll work with our director of pro personnel and our other scouts that, looking to really hone in our roster and sign a couple guys from Summer League. That's the goal. And that's what a lot of teams will be doing is evaluating who is on E10s, or maybe they're even undrafted, just Summer League camp invites that you might want to elevate to your roster as a two-way.
And then you're going to Italy.
And then I'm going to Italy, right?
Honeymoon.
Then the honeymoon hits, and I'm looking forward to that. It'll be a nice little getaway, and I've never been overseas, so my wife hasn't as well. So it'll be a great trip going over to Italy for 12 days and getting that time.
I'll mention you'll get a kick out of this. I want to mention this. I forgot to mention this on the show when you were on the Border Patrol earlier this morning. So I can't remember what day it was. It was either Saturday or Sunday. And I was upstairs, and my wife, Susan, was downstairs doing something in the kitchen, doing some housework or whatever, working on something. And I could hear she likes, when she's doing work around the house, likes to have music on real loud. And it was it didn't sound like the music normally she listened to, because normally she's either some country music, or she's maybe a little hip-hop here, whatever. And
variety.
And guess what she was listening to?
Del Sutton.
Del Sutton, a full CD of Del Sutton.
I love it. The full album.
I like to listen to Jarrett's father sing.
That's great. Just around the house?
Just my house was filled with the music of Del Sutton.
This is my childhood, Susan. This is my childhood. Just listening to Del Sutton throughout the house all day, every day.
Right. I mean, he was crooning. He's getting after it.
He's getting after it. He's still writing music, and he's on Spotify. He's on all sorts of different different music outlets. And
Del Sutton on Spotify.
Del Sutton on Spotify. Quick plug for Dad. Yeah. So he's had some voice issues right before my wedding. He had some allergy, issues where, he was in bad voice, and like when my dad's not in good voice, I'm sure you've dealt with this before. Like that's his like livelihood. He
was good at the wedding.
Yeah, he was great at the wedding. It's not. I mean, that was a answered prayer, really, that he was in good health. And
why won't he perform on this podcast?
I think he would perform on this podcast. He'd perform
Ben says yes to that.
I think one time when I came on, this was a couple years ago on the Border Patrol. I think there was like Dad's album in the background,
Right.
and like very soothing
But
into
I want
the
a
segment.
live performance in studio on this podcast or something.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know.
He'd do it.
Breakfast casserole from
That's-
Ellen Sutton.
yeah.
That's a whole other story.
The Sutton, my parents will both will be in helping out the show.
You have many travels ahead, so it's going to be a while before our next podcast. But whether you like it or not, we will be back with another round of House of Hustle podcast. Hope you've enjoyed talking basketball. I love talking basketball with you, and we're going to work on having some guests and doing some different things when we come back after a hiatus, because I'll be traveling to Lake Tahoe, and then I'll spend a week or so up in St. Joe. You're going all over the place, and then pretty soon we'll be talking about college basketball right around the corner, and it is on. So thank you, of course, to our wonderful sponsors, Charlie Hustle. We couldn't do it without you. And Ben Messner, who we
Yes.
literally couldn't do
sir,
do it
Ben.
without him because we don't understand the equipment. So I don't know. People
Ben
ask me
makes
about
it
this
run.
stuff.
Ben makes it run.
I talk into a microphone. Like I go to like different events at our work, and they ask me, "Can you set this up?" I go, "No, I can't."
Sorry.
You put a
Out of
microphone in
my
front of me,
range,
and
out of my
Dumb
skill
will
set.
talk, and that's it. So Ben is our technical advisor and director. So Jarrett, safe travels to you.
Thank you, sir. You
and
too.
We'll be talking basketball sooner than later, I'm sure.
I can't wait. I mean, well, like you said, trying to get more guests on as we get closer to next season. That's on the so many guys now are closing up shop with overseas and playing. You know, Michael Porter just won a national championship, or excuse me, an NBA championship. So we got to get some guys.
Why would you say that?
I know. I was at a Mizzou event last night, and I know, and I'm like, oh man, like it just kind of came out wrong there.
Maybe
I'm sorry.
Dennis Gates will make that a true statement at some point in my life.
But no, it's been great to host the show with you, and you know I appreciate all your work, and Ben as well making this happen, and everybody at Charlie Hustle too to put this together. It's been a great year of covering college and NBA and all things basketball.
That's right. We talk basketball with Jarrett Sutton here on the House of Hustle. And remember, until the next episode, Kansas City is for hustlers.